for today, wanted to bring you something that I have been thinking about for a few weeks. And as most of you know, I will be next Sunday beginning my 4-part series on the blessed life. And so I kind of get in different veins of thought, I guess. And Brother Hillstead, then it's like a vortex. I can't get out, it seems like. So I kind of teach supplemental lessons that go along with my sermon. So in preparation for this, the older I've gotten and the older I have gotten spiritually, I have realized how simple it really is to live for God. It's not complicated. The Bible's not complicated. It's a very simple document. Our kids memorize verses. They quote verses. So the Bible is not something that's some document that you have to have a doctor of theology degree to understand. I believe that the simplest person can understand the Word of God. I also believe that it's very simple to live for God. It's all about commitment. Once you commit, then you can do it. There's people in this room, including me, have been married for a few years, and no marriage is perfect. I haven't found a perfect marriage. You know why? Because it's two imperfect people that got married. And two people usually from different backgrounds, from different maybe educational levels, from different ideas, got together. But the way they stay together is you learn to compromise, you learn to get along, you learn that it's not just all about me, and we learn all of that stuff. Now, the only way you learn it is by doing it. You cannot be married 50 years without being married 50 years. It don't work that way. You can't just pick a number out of the air and say, well, I've been married 25 years. No, it's 25 years. So in preparation for this, I named this lesson Cost versus Reward. Because in every decision we make, and I'm not talking about whether we're going to have Fruit Loops or Frosted Flakes in the morning for breakfast. I'm talking about major decisions. Most of the time, those decisions are based on cost versus reward. What's it going to cost, and is it worth the trouble to get there? And so I'll start out with an illustration of the human body. I love studying. I love studying history. I love studying. I would rather watch documentaries than Hollywood productions, and because I have a quest for learning, love to learn. The human body, when you think about it, is an amazing creation. God knew what He was doing when He created us. We have 5 senses that are constantly gathering information, and it sends it through an extensive network of nerves to the control center of the body, which is the brain. And so your brain is constantly computing all of this information and gathering information. And whether you realize it or not, you walk into a strange place, you're probably automatically scanning, looking. You know, it helps to have your head on a swivel sometimes, especially in unfamiliar environments, to figure out. None of us would go out here and cross the street today without looking both ways, probably once or twice, right? Your mom taught you that at a very early age. You look left, right, and then left again. And when we go out there to cross the street, it's amazing how I can give you about distances, but I'm not good enough to give you exact distance. I can look over there and say, well, L.A. Burrito is probably about 110 yards away. That's probably pretty close. But it's amazing how your brain can calculate how fast that car is coming, how far away it is, and whether it's safe for me to try to outrun it or not. And hopefully your brain will tell you, let's stray on the side of being conservative because you're going to lose that battle every time. So we're probably going to be a little more cautious there. So our bodies are constantly gathering this information and feeding it to us. Your eyes gather the visual information. The human eye is amazing. It can see the colors of the rainbow. That's our spectrum we can see. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The amazing thing about the human eye is it can focus on close, mid, and far at the same time. Think about it. That is amazing. Now, my far vision failed me at about 29 or 30 years old, so I wear contacts. And I can still read without the use of glasses or contacts. I retained my, is that near vision? I retained my near vision. I can read without my contacts. However, I lost my mid-range, so I couldn't read, see the computer, and look at somebody walking in my office without contacts. So they hooked me up with progressive lens contacts, which in itself is an amazing technology. My contacts actually look like a target. It's got rings in it. And for the first, it took me about 2 weeks to get used to it. But once I've gotten used to it, I can instantly look down, look up, and see you guys all in complete focus because my eye has learned which ring to look into. Pretty amazing stuff. So when you think about this, your eyes look at information and feed that to your brain. Your ears decides how far or how near an object is based on sound. You can hear something and that was a far off sound. How did you know that? Your ear picked that up. Anybody ever heard of the Doppler effect? That's like the ambulance coming. You can tell when it's off, far off, and then the closer it gets, and then when it passes you, it fades away. That's called the Doppler effect. And your brain picks up through your ears that ambulance is coming, it's here, and it's gone, based on the sound waves that it's picking up. So all of this stuff is so cool because we are gathering that information. Your nose can distinguish a danger odor like natural gas or smoke or a fire, but then it also picks up pleasant odors like food and candies and perfumes. Do you know that your nose can associate odors with events? Every time I smell a pumpkin roll, I think of Thanksgiving and Christmas. Bring it on. Brother Hillstead, I think of fires and family gatherings and that day that you eat all that you want and then come back and eat again. Thanksgiving. And then you usually eat at night. And then Friday we start in on the leftover turkey with turkey sandwiches and praying and hoping some of that sweet stuff is left. But when I smell pumpkin or I smell a pumpkin roll, my brain automatically takes me to those memories. Because somewhere in my brain, there is a storage vault that stores all of this stuff, and then something will bring that out. Taste distinguishes sweet, sour, hot, mild, citrus. It's the first sense that develops in babies. We've got several little babies around here. There's one that I think will be here today for the first Sunday. Brother Hillstead, that one is more beautiful than any baby I've seen lately. That one has the last name Roberts. I'm, of course, a little partial. But do you know that as Abby grows, when you hand her something, the first thing a baby does, stick it in their mouth. You're constantly saying, no, that's nasty. Or that's okay. And so that first sense of taste develops, and that baby touches, that baby senses things through that. And then the final one is touch. Our brains conduct thousands of calculations. We know that when we hold a baby, we hold it softly and you caress his skin. But that same touch can pick up a hammer and hit an anvil with it very hard. So how do we do that? I've got Brother Caleb's going to help me with a couple of illustrations. I like to use illustrations. I've got Brother Caleb's going to help me out. Now then, I've got a baseball. It's nothing, it's just a baseball. So I've already talked to Brother Caleb, and he assures me he can catch a baseball. Y'all are laughing. But I didn't tell him how I was going to throw it. No, just kidding. I told him it would be an underhand throw. So when I toss Brother Caleb the baseball, when that ball leaves my hand, his brain is automatically calculating thousands of very complex calculations. The arch of the ball, he could tell how fast I threw the ball by the motion of my arm. He saw the arc. His body already knew, do I need to catch it up? Do I need to catch it down? And in the case of a baseball, it could hit the floor and it's not going to make any difference, right? So anybody can catch baseballs. So in order to make it interesting, I decided to bring some eggs. Put a little more skin in the game. Brother Braden assured me, he said, y'all are on live stream. And he found out I had eggs, and he's like, wow, this might be one we have to go in and literally clean up. And we are on the platform, so there's no room for error because the camera couldn't pick us up down in a safer place. All right, Brother Caleb, you ready? Now then, this calculation is going to be a little bit different because his brain has already picked up egg equals fragile, right? So we'll see how this one goes. Awesome. Very good. Notice how he caught that one. Wasn't a one-handed slap grab. It was like a very careful, ooh, let's make sure, right? No, he put a little heat on that one. Hang on a second. You were the one that was supposed to drop it, not me. That one almost backfired on me, but, uh-oh. That one was hard-boiled. I cheated just a little bit. That one's hard-boiled, so I took my wife's advice. Thank you, Brother Caleb. I took my wife's advice, and she said, don't do that to him. That's not cool. But without knowing that egg was hard-boiled, notice how we were a little more cautious with it. So your brain is doing all these calculations and at the same time feeding you this information and you react. So the human brain processes information based on our current environment. For instance, when I come into this sanctuary, I'm not scanning for deer or looking for other wildlife. That's off the table because there's never been a deer walk through Abundant Life Church that I know of. There's no wildlife other than squirrels get in every now and then. We get them out. But when I come into Abundant Life Church, I'm not scanning for any of that because it's not here. By the same token, when I go to the farm to deer hunt, I am not scanning for microphones, pulpits, and fancy lights because they ain't out there. So my brain can cut that part of the calculation off. There's no need in wasting computing power because that's not going to happen. But when I am driving to the farm, Brother Hillstead, my eyes is constantly on a swivel looking for those orange or green eyes because that means something's about to come across the road. And the best way to keep from hitting a deer is to see him before he runs. So my brain is doing constant calculations on the way to church, not so much because there's not that many deer that are crossing roads. They're all in the neighborhoods eating rose bushes and stuff. So when we look at all of this stuff that goes on, it is amazing how that happens. Most of our decisions we make in life are based on cost versus reward, and that is a computation that we do. But sometimes, and this is where I want to get into the meat of this lesson, sometimes emotions override what our senses are telling us. Did your mom ever tell you don't stay around that crowd there? That's a bad crowd. You don't need to hang around them. But they were the cool kids, right? And for whatever reason, we were attracted to that, so we kind of, emotions overrode what our mom told us. Because your mom and dad told you stuff that was conservative, that was straight, that was very timely, and that's not very cool when you're a teenager. You want to experience that stuff. So when we look at that, we do these computations and we get all of this good information, but a lot of times our emotions get involved, and that's where we make a mistake. So for instance, most entrepreneurs have a very high tolerance for risk-taking. You ever met an entrepreneur? They never found an idea they didn't like. And it's always, if I do this, we can make a lot of money with this idea. And they're constantly selling that, and they're saying, you know what, I believe this will work, and I've done some research, and this is a need. And I am not an entrepreneur. I'm a safe guy by nature. But I can remember walking into Kinko's for the first time and saying, why in the world didn't I think of this? It's a copy machine in a storefront. Could have been called Tony's. Because I have spent a lot of time in Kinko's. That is a traveling salesman's dream. That's nirvana there. You can go in there and print stuff and put stuff together, and man, it is fantastic. And then the best thing about Kinko's is they got big enough they sold it to FedEx. So whoever came up with the Kinko's idea is filthy rich, I promise you. promise you, he is somewhere with a big bank account right now. But the reason I didn't think of that, Brother Hillstead, is because my mind's not geared toward that. Think of these other things that are happening with apps on phones and all of this stuff. I'm just not geared like that. I'm not an entrepreneurial spirit, if you will. And so they risk time and money, and they've never found an idea they didn't like. And they see potential there that others don't see because we're not geared like that. But we need entrepreneurs, right? A great majority of the population are less tolerant to risk. We work a safe job and a safe career because we like the feeling of security, and we're not tolerant to a lot of risk. And I'm not presenting either one of those as right or wrong. It's just different personalities. I like safe. I'll be honest with you. I like security. I like a sure thing. But that doesn't mean that's necessarily the right or wrong thing. It's just the way that we are. So I was in Troy, Alabama at one of our camps this year and out exercising, and I came across something that I want to use as an example today. The first picture they're going to show you, can we dim the lights real quick so they can see the detail? Is that possible? There we go. All right, this is a walking trail, and over a low place, a wet place, they built these bridges, which are real. You can tell when I show you another picture how fancy they are. This is a greenbrier vine that's growing up through there. Now, then, this bridge is probably 5 feet off the ground, so this is a very mature vine. It's already grown up through this thing. It's real healthy, real green. Deer absolutely love that. That is like deer delicacy there. And so it's right there for the taking, but it's not been nibbled on by a deer. Now then, let's go to picture 2, and I'll show you why. That greenbrier is halfway down there on the right-hand side of that bridge. And I can imagine when a deer steps out, Brother Hillstead, and looks at that greenbrier, the temptation is go get it. But then something in his calculation says, wait a minute, if you get out there halfway, there is no escape. You're 5 feet above the little creek that's running through there. If you try to dodge left, you've got traffic, a slick road you could fall on. If you try to go right, you're falling down an embankment. And if you run that way down that bridge, you're exposed for at least, 100 feet, 120 feet. This is not good, so he just leaves that alone. Because there's too much risk involved, and somewhere along the way, that instinct says the risk is not worth the reward. Stay off the bridge. Let that one go. Thank y'all. Y'all can bring the lights back up. Thank you very much. So when we look at this, the cost is simply not worth the reward. I hope this will make sense here in a few minutes. We all make these types of decisions. And I'm guilty of making these. For instance, later in deer season, after I've harvested a few deer, and I'm getting close to what I need for my family to enjoy for the off year, I tend to get more selective with my harvest during an afternoon hunt. As a matter of fact, I've let a lot of does walk off a lot of fields around 4 o'clock because I know what comes after that. Usually, during deer season, dark happens like that. It's not like during the summer. I mean, you look up and at 4:30, it's starting to get dark. At 4:40, 4:45, it's dark. Then I got to gather all my stuff, get out of the tree, get on the field. You're using a flashlight to blood trail a deer if she didn't fall, or if the deer didn't fall on the field. And all I can think about is I've got about an hour before I can get back to the trailer. Because I got to find the deer, I got to load the deer. Then we got another 30 or 40 minutes, best case scenario, at the skinning shed. And you know what? It's easy to talk myself out of that late in the season. Because I'd rather be at the trailer with the frozen pizza in the oven, cup of coffee, chilling out and planning for in the morning. So I do the calculation and I talk myself out of that because I know what's coming after that. Makes sense? Because I see what this is. It's not just a man, I think I might preach this to the youth. This will probably work in a youth class. It's easy to see that instant gratification. But you need to look past that and say, wait a minute, that might not be a good decision. Because there's something that's going to come after that. And so we need to weigh that very carefully and decide, maybe that's not exactly the way that I need to go, because sometimes we make decisions based on the moment without considering what happens in the future. Now, I really think this is going to make sense here. Judges chapter 13 and verse 2. I need to read some scriptures to you. Now there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. And his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, indeed, now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now, therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean, for behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. We know this is talking about a judge named Samson. Most people miss the miraculous conception of Samson. Samson had everything going for him. In the Bible, when you find a barren woman who miraculously conceives, it is for a purpose. Think of how many great men in the Bible were conceived of barren women. Because God has a tendency to not look at the current conditions, but what can happen. And when you find a woman that was barren in the Bible, that was a mark of shame. That was something that she was an outcast of society. It was a serious situation to be barren. But these women would cry out to God, and God would hear them, and He would caution them, you are going to bear a son, but be careful because he is going to be special. So Samson's birth, when you look at his birth, a miraculous birth, and the instructions, notice how God never surprises anybody. He gives us the information we need. Up front, he's going to be special. He's going to be a Nazarite. Don't do this, don't do that. Be careful. He is chosen for something. Now then, in Judges chapter 14, skip ahead one chapter, verse 2. So he, Samson, went up and told his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Remember his enemies. Right? Because we just read in chapter 13, you are born to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines, your enemies. Now then, he is flirting with enemy women. Stay with me. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. And notice Samson's level of cognitive thought when risk versus or cost versus benefits enters into the equation. All of a sudden, Samson does not see the Philistine woman as an enemy. He sees her as someone I want to marry. Now then, Samson was chosen by God. I will submit to you. He was a godly man. I believe he had advantages others did not. I believe he was chosen to be a judge to deliver Israel. It just so happens that this lesson today coincides with the Purpose Institute I taught yesterday. My semester this year, I'm teaching on the historical books and the books of poetry. Judges immediately follows Joshua. Joshua was a fantastic leader. He was a military mind. He was a brilliant strategist. Not only did he conquer the land of Canaan, the promised land, but he was responsible for dividing it up. Now then, I'm not sure how they did it back in those days, but they did not have GPS and mapping systems. So I imagine that dividing up a land and coming up with the borders involved a whole lot of walking. and measuring with whatever crude instruments they had, and some kind of map drawing, because the Bible is very specific. This tribe gets this land, and it runs from this to that by this river and down through here. And he gives very specific, right, instructions of this is the land. So Joshua was a brilliant man. He followed Moses, and then he took the children of Israel to places Moses literally could not take them. And then following the death of Joshua, we roll into the book of Judges. And most scholars will tell you the book of Judges is a book of failures. How can you go from conquering the land, inhabiting the land, running the enemies off? How do you go from there to failure? It's because they lost focus. All of a sudden, I have found this in my own life to be true. People need a goal out in front of them. You need something to live for. Talk to different people about this. Most of y'all know the situation I went through with my health. Hopefully I'll meet with my doctor. I had my MRI, had all the checkups, so hopefully I'll meet with my doctor this week and lay out a plan of action to discuss what all the tests found. But for my personality, the worst thing I can do is just go to the house and sit around. That's not me. That's not me. I've got to be on a bike. I've got to be in the woods. I've got to be involved in something. I've got to have something out there in front of me. I can't just sit at the house and just figure out what's going on and what am I going to do. And so we all have these different personalities, and you look at the personality of Joshua. He was a leader. He had a vision for the people of Israel. We got to conquer this. We're going to have this land. We're going to lay it all out. This is what our forefathers told us about, and then all of a sudden they've accomplished that, and now we don't have a goal anymore, so they just kind of sit around and figure out ways to get in trouble. They start into idolatry. They start with disobedience to God. They lose focus. And the next thing you know, God is appointing judge after judge after judge, trying to steer them in the right direction. And if you look at the book of Judges, it is straying away from God, coming back to God, straying away from God, coming back to God. And they're just ping-ponging back and forth. And so when you look at this story, it's like, wow, how do you lose focus in such short periods of time? That is why we've got to be careful that we stay on track, that we stay on focus, that we keep goals in front of us and we keep moving in that direction. So now we see Samson asking his father to bring him a foreign wife that he wants to marry. And then in chapter 16, verse 1, now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. So now then the women trouble with Samson keeps moving in the wrong direction. Sooner or later you got to take responsibility for your actions and say, this is not a good direction. We've gone from an enemy woman now to a situation where she's even worse than that one, but Samson is continually, evidently doing the calculation, and he says, well, the cost and the reward. And then only 3 verses later, afterward it happened, Judges 16:4, afterward it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. And now we can trace the fall of Samson from a pinnacle. I think I preached a couple of Sundays ago. All of this stuff starts running together after a while in my mind, but I think I preached the thought here maybe on a Wednesday night. The law of gradualism. You don't backslide overnight. That's just the result. But it was gradually giving up ground. It was gradually moving from here to there. It was gradually slipping up here, slipping up there. That is why it's so important to be able to take that mental calculation and that self-check, I call it the self-checkup, and make sure my walk with God is where it needs to be. The story of Samson is familiar to us, a man chosen by God who had a purpose. His life and the meaning of his life were all ordered by God and very carefully planned. But then Samson chose a different path and a different direction. I'm sure there were warning signs there. But for whatever reason, when Samson made the calculations, he decided it is worth it. Samson had a problem with women. He allowed them into his life, and despite the call of God on his life, he chose to entertain women who were not meant for him, who were not good for him. And the cost versus reward for his choices that he made should be a lesson to us all. He had a bright future and an ordered life in front of him. His life could not have been any brighter. We understand that in the end, Samson achieved a great victory. In the end, he won a victory. But instead of celebrating that, I always go back to the question, what could have been? Instead of a victory at the end where I am blinded by my enemies, remember, they've got him down at the grist mill doing the job of a donkey. And they've made fun of him, and he's been such a spectacle, they'd forgot about him. It's like going to the zoo and getting used to seeing the animals. Nobody's even paying attention to Samson. He's a has-been. He's out there. He's on the junk pile of humanity. Walking around in a circle. Eyes blinded. I celebrate the graciousness and the grace of God. I celebrate the restorative power of God. But what could he have accomplished if he had stayed on track and he had stayed focused and he had stayed with the plan? That's why we need to teach our children so strongly. You don't have to leave the church. You don't have to stay in the church. Stay dedicated to God. And then you don't have to live your life with regrets or trying to figure out, how do I get back to that point? How do I get back to this point? Just stay in the church, and then that saves you. Amen. I love to preach grace and mercy. I think I'm a grace and mercy preaching type of preacher. I love that. But I also, on the other side, preach that every time you slip up, you will bear the scars. The human body has such a marvelous ability to heal itself. I guess it's been almost, it was at the first of the year, sometime in January, I was in a hurry trying to process some of my deer meat. Had a very, very sharp knife, a deboning knife, and I was at the house getting ready to go to a meeting, and I thought, man, I can knock this out real quickly. And it was one of those situations where you're just in a hurry, and I am actually cutting and bringing the knife back to me. And the instant I did that was like, that's a bad idea. I was just in a hurry, and I sliced my index finger. I think it probably went to the knuckle. And it was one of those cuts that's so deep and so fast and such a sharp knife, you don't even realize you're cut. And I looked down like, where's all that blood coming from? It's coming from me. So I run inside and grab some Band-Aids and wrap it up real tight. There, that'll keep the blood. Should have went and got stitches. Elizabeth told me you should have went and got stitches. I didn't have time. So I wrap it real tight with Band-Aids, and I'm back down there doing it again like, wow, where's this blood coming from? And it's squirting out from under the Band-Aids and junk. And so I finally got the thing to quit bleeding. And I was looking the other day, and Brother Hillstead, I still don't have good use of this. Thank God it's not my right finger. It's on my left hand. But I still don't have the full use, and I've got a nice little scar there. Now, I will recover. Obviously, I recovered. I didn't bleed out, didn't cut my finger off. But I will bear that scar and probably limited use of my finger for the rest of my life. I made a bad decision. Thank God it wasn't a fatal decision. But how many people make decisions that are not good in their life, and sure, you can bounce back from it. Sure, you can, but you'll bear those scars. That's why it's so important to marry the right person and pick the right career and stay focused on the things that matter. Samson was the only one who could make this calculation in his life. He was the only one. And at the end of the day, once we reach the age where we make our own decisions, it's really us that's to blame, because I can't blame somebody else for a decision that I made. So now then, I don't want to leave you without hope. Acts chapter 8, verse 1. Let me read this scripture. And now Saul was consenting to his death, the death of Stephen. At that time, a great persecution rose against the church, which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Acts chapter 9, verse 17. And Ananias went his way and entered the house, and laying his hands on him, he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you came, has sent me that you may receive your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Verse 18, immediately there fell from his eyes something like scales, and he received his sight at once, and he arose and was baptized. Verse 19, so when he had received food, he was strengthened. Then Saul spent some days with the disciples at Damascus. Verse 20, immediately he preached the Christ in the synagogues, that he is the Son of God. Verse 21, then all who heard were amazed and said, is not this the one who destroyed those who called on this name in Jerusalem, and has come here for that purpose, so that he might bring them bound to the chief priest? But Saul increased all the more in strength and confounded the Jews who dwelt in Damascus, proving that this Jesus is the Christ. Saul was an educated religious man who was very famous in his day. He had something going for him. He had everything going for him. He was well known. Saul showed up and got instant respect in the synagogues. He was like that guy. He had a following. He had people that looked up to him. Saul had it going on. He had respect. He had respect of those in authority. Yet Saul was willing to risk all of this stuff that would have been so important in his life to take a chance with something his peers viewed as heresy and false religion. And this movement was led by a man who was very misunderstood in the things that he taught. Yet Saul, the one with the reputation, the one who came into town and everybody said, oh, Brother Saul's with us. He was willing to risk all of that because he said, I have found the real thing. That's hard to walk away from. The respect, the gratitude, the worship, if you will, of these people that hold him in high esteem, and Brother Saul this and Brother Saul that. And yet when he saw the truth, he is willing to walk away from that. And if you look at the cost versus reward, you would think, why, Saul? You've got everything going on. If you'll just do what you're doing. But Saul said, I'm not content there because I see something else. And he's willing to risk what he has in order to obtain something he does not have. Wow. Now then, we have the advantage of knowing the rest of the story. Saul absolutely makes the right decision. Christ and who he is revealed to him, and he begins to preach and teach that. And even though his friends turn on him, we see what God had in store for Saul, who turned to Paul, if he was willing to accept it. And Paul goes on to evangelize or be the missionary to basically the whole then known world. He writes over 2/3 of our New Testament, and we look at his life and say, wow, but somewhere along the way he had to make a decision. Do I leave the safety of what I know? Do I walk away from all my friends and all my influence? What will they think about me? Because Paul didn't just change sides. He went from, I'm this esteemed man, to now I'm delving into heresy, false religion. That's quite There's no middle ground there. Everybody used to like you hate you now. And those that hated you probably don't trust you because they know who you are. Imagine Paul a lot of times thought, wow, so I don't have any friends anywhere. The ones I left behind can't stand me. The ones that I'm trying to move toward can't stand me because they know they hold my past against me. And I wonder if he ever asked himself, is it worth it? Yes, in the end, it ended up being worth it. I think our challenge today is, am I willing to leave what is safe and secure and maybe slide over here and take a chance on something and just see what God can do for me and with me? But you can't have it both ways. You've got to make a decision. Which way do I move? Which way do I go? What do I do? How can I do this? I believe that Saul was willing to risk his reputation, his friends, his future in order to switch sides so that he could spread the gospel that he believed in. I guess when it comes down to it, and I'll wrap up with this, the decisions that we make are up to perception. In the eyes of Paul, it was absolutely the correct decision, but in the eyes of his peers, they probably thought it was absolutely the wrong decision. It's all about perception. Paul's friends probably couldn't believe you've walked away from a safe ministry, you've walked away from that and you're walking over here, but Paul is saying, you guys don't see what I see. It's absolutely the right decision because it's all about perception. I believe that Paul was willing to walk away from something safe and risk everything. He went on to be such a great man in the Bible, and I believe that today our decisions will be made, and then the result of those might not reveal their plan or the results for years. But we should make those decisions based on good information. I believe that Samson could have made different decisions based on just information. We know that his mom and dad tried to discourage it. We know that the type of women he was hanging around with was not the type of women that you need to be hanging around with. So we know that he had plenty of warning signs up. But for whatever reason, he makes the choice and says, well, this is the choice that I'm going to make based on the information that I have. So the cost versus reward calculation is one that has to be made by us and us alone. Because at the end of the day, I'm the only one that can make that decision. Here's the cost. Here's the reward. Which way do I go? That is where we need to encourage our children, our young people. Consult God. Consult a man of God. Consult a mentor. Consult someone that you trust in your life. Don't make those decisions on your own. Don't make those quickly. Look it over. Check it out. Make sure that you're headed in the right direction, and then make the best decision that you can when you gather all this information together, and make sure that you're on the right track and that everything. My wife tells me all the time, she says, you need to learn to trust my intuition. She finally got through to me. Because after time of her being right, I finally approached her and said, you're right. There is something called women's intuition. I can't explain it, don't know how it works. But if your wife ever says, honey, I feel, pay attention to her. Because she has told me time after time, stay away from that guy. He's not good. There's something about him like, baby, you are way off on this one. And then when it happened, I'm hoping she forgets about it. Brother Garrett. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to be rejected. At the end of the day, we all want to be accepted. Our kids are very susceptible to that. But peer pressure can be a good thing. Keep them hanging around the right people. Keep them hanging around godly people. And then that peer pressure will sway them in the right direction. I always teach when I have the opportunity to teach our young people. Let's all stand together. I always tell them, I always conclude somewhere in there, or throw this in there somewhere, there are very few mistakes that are fatal. Very few that are fatal. We can bounce back from a lot of bad decisions. I have. So very few are fatal. However, when one of those mistakes is made that might not be fatal, it does distract you, it derails you, and it could be one of those that is hard to recover from. Because sin has a tendency to have lasting consequences. So I caution them, even though I believe in grace and mercy, even though I preach that and I teach that and I believe that, even though I believe in that, there are some things that will distract you for years because of bad decisions that you make. And maybe some of those decisions could even derail a ministry. So be careful. Walk around that decision a few times. Look at it from different angles. Get some different opinions. Amen. Thank y'all for being here this morning. We'll take a break. 12 o'clock is our worship service. Shake hands with somebody. Tell them how much you love and appreciate them. And we'll be back ready to worship at 12 o'clock.